It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
A strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country.
Strong language from the Prime Minister as he promises to reduce immigration. Net migration increased to almost 1 million under Boris Johnson. Now the Tories say they want a cap.
I think Labour are taking us for fools, quite frankly. I think they are taking us for fools. This is nowhere near the scale of the change that we need to see.
We'll hear from the care sector, where the government says it's ending foreign recruitment. Also today...
I really want to embrace my masculinity, which is a crazy thing to say in 2025. You know what I mean? People are like, what?
Are you with me? Against me?
Can role models like singer-songwriter Youngblood change perceptions of masculinity? Joining us today, Labour MP Danny Beales, Conservative MP Robbie Moore, Richard Reeves from the American Institute for Boys and Men, and journalist and broadcaster Dawn Neeson. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Well, the Prime Minister delivered a hard-hitting speech, certainly rhetoric-wise, in terms of cutting immigration. Now, we've heard tough talk from politicians on the issue of immigration for years. My opening question to the panel, starting with you, Danny, is will the Prime Minister be able to deliver to voters' satisfaction?
I mean, obviously, time will tell. Key will be what happens in the next 4 years. But I welcome the announcement today. I think my constituents will welcome the announcement today. We recognise the value that people coming to this country bring to our public services, but also know that the levels we've seen under the last government were unmanageable. Nearly 1 million extra people a year isn't manageable, and we need to get the system under control. And people need to have a confidence that the system is fair, that it's working, and that people coming here are working and contributing. Are
you confident in the Prime Minister's ability to cut immigration significantly, to use his words? You sound, only time will tell, you don't sound that confident.
Well, I think it's about judging the actions as they get delivered. I think that the steps that we've heard today, I do support a much better, more balanced graduate visa system. I think the care sector does need to rebalance on local recruitment. We need to improve pay and conditions in the care sector. That's clear to me. So, you know, I support the measures being announced today. I haven't seen the full white paper, and I look forward to seeing it. But I think these are welcome first steps that most people in this country will think are sensible and needed.
Do you think Keir Starmer will be able to do what previous Conservative Prime Ministers and leaders have failed to do, and that is deliver on immigration?
I don't think the announcements from the Prime Minister are going nowhere near far enough, not radical enough, not having the strength, actually, that is needed to deal with the challenge of getting net migration down, whether that's through legal or illegal routes. You know, I fear that today's announcement is just more headline politics, feeding the narrative that the wider population want to see, that we need to be getting net migration down. But I fear very much that it doesn't have the strength that is needed, like measures of having a statutory cap, like measures of wanting the ability to challenge the ECHR, or the ability of not having the human rights mechanisms that Starmer has not announced. I mean, the strength is lacking, is what I would...
I mean, having a cap, it wasn't statutory all the way through Conservative government years, but having a statutory cap or a cap at all doesn't seem to have delivered. I mean, Conservative governments failed catastrophically to deliver on what they promised, which was reducing net migration to tens of thousands.
And incredibly frustrating. Look, I only got elected in 2019, and it is infuriating that we have not managed to get those levels down, which is why radical change is needed. And today's announcements, as far as I see, don't go anywhere near far enough.
I mean, you heard the Prime Minister there, Richard Reeves, and this issue is one that has been talked about for a decade or so. Will the Prime Minister, do you think, be able to actually deliver to what voters are expecting?
Well, the irony, of course, is that when David Cameron talked about the cap, he quickly realised he couldn't really deliver on that because we're members of the European Union. Now, of course, we're in a slightly different situation, and so the politics of a cap are rather different now than they were before. But I will say what struck me about his announcement was less the policy substance, which seems sensible to me, and more his comment about the squalor of the politics around this. And obviously I live in the US now, where we've seen the politics around immigration lead to a sort of pinballing of policy from one direction to another, whereas this is an environment that desperately needs some stability in policy making. And unfortunately that does mean you have to take, you obviously want political debate, but you have to take a little bit of the heat out of the politics of this to deliver the stability in the policy framework that we so desperately need. And unfortunately, for obvious reasons, it's become very highly politicised, which means that there's a danger that you swing from one extreme to the other on this policy. And that's what we've seen, frankly, since Tony Blair came into office in 1997. And I served in the first Tony Blair government as well, believe it or not. And so you've seen this issue has been building for a very long time and will take quite a long time to fix.
I mean, Richard's right. The language is striking, Dawn, that we heard there from Keir Starmer talking about it being squalid, the discussion around it. What did you make of that? And do you think he will be able to deliver what voters are expecting and want?
I think the devil is in the detail. We don't know the detail yet. I think the rhetoric was incredibly strong. He was saying all the right things that I think voters of all colours, political colours, want to hear. You know, migrants must, you know, earn their keep, British jobs, British workers, training, etc. Control our borders. He said control our borders 5 times in that speech. He also managed to blame the previous government 5 times in that speech as well. He was saying, using language that you would expect the Conservative government or even a Reform politician to use, to be honest with you. But I need to know the detail. I need to know how this is going to happen. And more importantly, with the training for British workers, how much is that going to cost?
Well, let's hear a little bit more of what Keir Starmer had to say.
Take back control. Everyone knows that slogan, and everyone knows what it meant on immigration, or at least that's what people thought. Because what followed from the previous government, starting with the people who used that slogan, was the complete opposite. Between 2019 and 2023, even as they were going round our country, telling people with a straight face that they would get immigration down, net migration quadrupled until in 2023 it reached nearly 1 million. That's about the population of Birmingham, our second largest city. That's not control, it's chaos. A one-nation experiment in open borders, conducted on a country that voted for control. Well, no more. Today, this Labour government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We will deliver what you've asked for time and again, and we will take back control of our borders. I know, on a day like today, people who like politics will try to make this all about politics, about this or that strategy, targeting these voters, responding to that party. No. I'm doing this because it is right, because it is fair, and because it is what I believe in.
Well, let's talk to our deputy political editor, Vicky Young. Forthright there in his delivery and the promises to cut significantly levels of net migration. But Vicky, how are they going to do it?
Well, I think it's worth remembering that there were changes made under the last Conservative government which are already having an effect. So we know that the number of visas being issued has dropped by quite a lot. So that will be shown in the next set of figures. So you could argue that that might already have been met. There were also changes the Tories made about people not being able to bring in their dependents. But as for these new policies, well, they include no care workers from abroad. When it comes to students, there will be a 6% levy on higher education. Graduates will only be allowed to stay for 18 months rather than 2 years. When it comes to skilled workers, the qualification needed has to be degree level rather than A level. The shortage occupation list could be slimmed down, and there will be an increase in English language requirements for workers and their dependents. Now, in terms of what the impact might be, the government has tried to do an analysis of this. They say that of the policies that they were able to assess, it could reduce immigration by 100,000 a year.
What about the politics of all of this? We've just been talking about that a little bit here in the studio with our guests.
Well, you could tell, couldn't you, from the rhetoric there? I mean, the Prime Minister using language which I don't remember him using before, talking in a very tough way about all of this. Now, of course, concerns over immigration are not a new thing. There are many people in this country who've been voicing their displeasure over the numbers of people coming here for a very long time. You go back to the Brexit vote, for example, and of course, the recent success of Reform UK in those local elections. I've just been speaking to their leader, Nigel Farage, and this is what he has said today about today's announcements.
Well, I'm flattered that the Prime Minister has changed his rhetoric on immigration. Remember, it wasn't even one of the 5 priorities that he had going into the general election. He's obviously very panicked. Let's see. I mean, he told us, of course, that he'd smash the gangs and the boats would stop coming, and yet they're coming in record numbers. Let's see whether he has any more success. I suspect what's really happening here is tinkering around the edges, and even if the numbers do reduce, they'll still be at massive historic highs.
Now, Nigel Farage says that he would want zero net migration. That's what the party's manifesto said, although it did say apart from essential workers. So there are many parties saying that we still might have the need for people to come here. But, you know, it will be very interesting to see. This is an area which has been littered with broken promises, and we'll have to see whether Labour's plans do have an impact.
Vicky Young, thank you very much. Let's pick up, Danny, with something that Nigel Farage said, which is even if the numbers are reduced, and they may well be, initially, maybe by 50,000, maybe up to 100,000, he says it will still be a fraction of the increase that has occurred in recent years. Let's just show you the numbers here on this graph. Migration adds 728,000 to the UK population. You can see there, this is under Boris Johnson's government, but look at the numbers of total arrivals, because net migration is obviously arrivals minus departures. It's over 1 million. So even if the government manages to cut it by 100,000, do you accept that that's probably only a drop in the ocean in the minds of many voters?
I mean, I think most voters don't have a particular figure in mind, at least the ones I've met. What they want is a managed migration system.
But we've got a managed migration system.
I don't think it feels well managed.
Governments have decided this is net legal migration. They've decided to have these figures. So what I'm saying is, can you really cut that figure dramatically?
I think the figures started to drop already. Yeah. I think the actions taken today will bring down that number further. I mean, I think Nigel Farage grabs the headline, but Reform don't have a credible plan, don't even have a plan at all to act on this issue or any other issue, in fact. We've got a recently elected council leader already saying we have no plan to govern in Kent Council. So I think behind the headlines, what people want is not this kind of mudslinging and politicking about the issue. They want people to come together and to find sensible ways forward to bring the system under control, to manage the system better and to have a fairer system where we know who's coming in, it's a manageable level with infrastructure and economic growth, and people feel that their own living standards are improving as well. And that's what I think today's announcement is seeking to do.
But, Robbie, do you accept that under Boris Johnson, he chose to have those numbers, maybe had good reason to want to have high levels of immigration, maybe good for the economy? Keir Starmer said not, because there wasn't any growth during those years. There may be other reasons for that. But it was a positive choice by the previous Conservative government.
I think there's also an acceptance, though, that net migration levels are far too high. And I said that consistently, whether it's legal or illegal. Well,
let's stick with legal migration for the moment, because those are the big numbers, if you like.
Yeah, and fine. And the white paper today illustrates that the government are wanting to get those numbers down by about 100,000. That, to me, is a drop in the ocean. And you need to have a twin-tracked process, which is, one, reducing net migration, and two, what is the strategy with upskilling your domestic supply of those that are wanting to enter the care sector, the construction sector, whatever it might be. And that's not what we've seen from today's announcement. There is no reassurance being provided to do with the upskilling agenda of the domestic supply chain that will be the domestic individuals that will be entering the supply chain for whatever sector that may be.
Right, I don't know how long and what sort of timescale you're talking about, but do you then support having higher levels of net migration until such time that we have a domestic workforce that can perhaps fill the gaps in the care sector?
No, my view is that we absolutely need to be having a strategy with reducing net migration. That has to be the core principle.
Whatever the consequences.
There may be short-term economic consequences, but there has to be a twin-track process that is outlined by the government of the day, and that's what I would advocate the government to do, that is reassuring people about how we upskill our domestic employment workforce so that we can provide more reassurance to those sectors that do need to recruit long-term.
How important are the numbers? I mean, when you look at the figures, do you think people do want, broadly, a figure? Yes, tens of thousands was never reached, not even close. But do you think the voting public does want a figure, and that up to and around 100,000 just won't mean anything?
So my sense of this, again, a bit informed by the US situation, is that people want the feeling that the system is under control. And the idea that we should control our borders is so common sense that the idea that that's a political statement at all is somewhat absurd. And one way they track that is just, what are they seeing? Are they looking at are they checking the ONS numbers every day? No, but they're looking around, they're getting a sense of what's happening in their country, and at a certain level, you can actually feel. You could feel it, and as your chart showed, this, as I said earlier, this has been going on a long time. There was a big increase during the Blair years in that chart as well. So it's going to take quite a long time to sensibly get this under control. This has been decades in the making. It will be decades in the fixing. And if we try to do it too quickly, it will have huge consequences for our labour market and for society. Because there are problems to which immigration is currently the solution. And you've already alluded to some of those in terms of the labour market. And they are not going to be solved overnight. And so it's very, very difficult for politicians to say that this is going to take quite a while to fix, because they feel they have to respond in the moment.
Right.
That won't do it.
Are the numbers important?
It's interesting, the front page of the Daily Mail today did say that Starmer is refusing to put a number on it. And on one hand, I don't blame him, because it's hiding to nothing. You are always going to, not be able to hit that. But the ONS, talking to the ONS, does say, we're looking at it will settle down to around about 500,000 a year, which basically is a city the size of Edinburgh. Every single year. We already have a huge housing crisis in this country. People can't get to see doctors, dentists, school places in many areas of the country are hard to come by. So yeah, I think people do care about the numbers. And if we don't have a target, Jo, how do we know whether it's working?
I mean, does there need to be a metric by which we judge the government?
Absolutely. There needs to be... absolutely there does. I mean, crikey, I spend every weekend door-knocking on the streets of Keighley, and that is exactly what my constituents are saying. They want to be reassured by the system by having a statutory cap, which I think Parliament needs to take control of. That is certainly something that we're advocating for. I don't know why the government are not wanting to get behind that.
But how do you decide what the number is?
Well, I would argue that there needs to be a proper sort of business case plan that looks at every different area, whether it's care workers, whether it's our agricultural sector, whether it's our construction sector, work out what the level...
That would help, because otherwise these numbers do feel somewhat plucked out of thin air, like David Cameron's original number, and they're always very suspiciously round numbers.
And that's why I think you do have to look at all of those sectors, work out where the need and the supply and demand is, but with an aspiration to get the net migration figures down. Absolutely.
And that's exactly what the government is.
But 100,000
that's exactly what the government is committed to.
Drop in the ocean.
But, turning around the picture we inherited, which was, to be frank, a shambles. Every part of the migration system had been broken. People are staying in expensive hotels because they weren't being processed. A Rwanda scheme costing hundreds of millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds long term, that sent no one forcibly back. The whole system was chaos. I think people will judge a migration system if it's working, yes, on the net migration numbers, but also about those other metrics. Are we closing all the hotels?
Well,
are we processing people quickly?
We'll come to that in just a moment. But let's talk about one key sector that is going to be directly affected, and that is the care sector. We can talk to Nadra Ahmed, who is the co-chair of the National Care Association. She's joining us from Rochester. Nadra, hello to you. What impact will the new government announcement yesterday to stop overseas care workers have on your sector?
Good afternoon. I think these are going to bring huge challenges, and let's be clear that isn't always our first port of call to have an international workforce. We would much rather have a domestic workforce, and the reason we've had to go down the route of an international workforce is because we're not getting the domestic workforce come come forward. And that's partly to do with the narrative that's being used by politicians on an ongoing basis about it being unskilled, low paid. All of these things are not going to inspire anybody to come in and work within our sector and actually see what a great role it is. But I think what we've got to be clear about is that the international recruitment route is also far more expensive than the domestic route. So if we are going to go down this route, then what I want to know from government is, where is the plan to make sure that we have a domestic workforce available? We've got 120,000 vacancies at this moment in time. We have 1.6 million workforce, and about 70,000 of them are international recruits. What will happen when this is going to come into force? What's the impact? The impact will be, if we can't get the workforce, we can't deliver the care. If we can't deliver the care, then providers will not be in the sector.
Right. Well, we have a Labour and a Conservative MP here in the studio, Nadra. But Danny, do you want to answer that directly?
Well, firstly, Nadja, I think you're exactly right that care work is skilled work, it is valuable work, and we need to completely change the narrative about
and pay people more?
And pay people better. And
Absolutely.
The government's committed to a fair pay agreement, passing legislation in that space for exactly that reason, is ensuring that care workers, like healthcare workers, have the ability to collectively agree pay levels between employers and care workers. And we need much better parity between the care sector and the health sector. That is a major change.
Yeah, but what's the plan? What's the government's plan, Nadra wants to know, when you stop them recruiting from overseas and there aren't enough domestic people here to fill those jobs?
Yeah,
what's the plan?
Both things have to happen concurrently, and I think that's right, and Nadra is right on that. These changes aren't coming in tomorrow. I understand there'll be a phased increase, and there's a white paper at the moment, so it's not passing tomorrow. So there's time now for us to work with the care sector to look how that fair pay agreement would work. The Baroness Casey review of the whole of the social care system, how we fund social care, is starting, and that work is crucial because fundamentally social care is a broken system. Nadja will know from people she works with, care providers are handing back contracts. The care system isn't working. People are really struggling to provide the care they need to people with the amounts they're getting paid and the amounts that councils have funding available.
Well, Nadja, do you want to come back on that? You look sceptical.
Yeah, no, I refute that. The social care system is not the one that's failing. It's everything around it that's failing. We're the people who are continuing to deliver despite all the barriers that you're putting in our way, like the
Nadja,
NIC.
I wasn't suggesting it was a failure.
We're not broken. It's the NHS that's broken. It's you know, local authority funding that's broken. We continue to deliver despite the fact that you're not funding us to pay our staff properly or to deliver the service.
I guess that was my point, Nadja, that the social care system, how it's funded, how it's delivered, how it works for the health and care sector as one sector isn't working. It's not a comment about people in the sector, they're doing their best, but fundamentally we've got an ageing population and how we've set social care up, largely a self-funded system, isn't working. So that's what the Baroness Casey review is looking to do, build a cross-party consensus about moving forward to support you and the sector to do that.
That review is going to take 3 years, I think, as I understand it. But Nadra, why don't you pay, or not you particularly, but why aren't care workers paid more?
Well, we're not paid more because we're commissioned at a very at a national minimum wage. We're commissioned by local authorities at a very low wage, and so we're not funded properly. So everything that comes forward, even like this time when the national living wage has gone up, the providers have been given something like 3% from local authorities to deal with that and the national increase in the contributions, the employers' national insurance contributions. So I think what we've got is we've got years and years where there's been no investment in social care by successive governments. And this government is actually making it much worse because of everything they're announcing is having a major impact. The Treasury is refusing to listen to the sector. And we're just finding, I mean, the Casey review is just a bit of a, you know, it's a red herring in some ways. I have huge respect for Baroness Casey, but, you know, 3 years to wait and then 10 years to implement when we need that now.
Well, Nadra, Conservative MP, I mean, Robbie, would you like to see care workers paid more?
I absolutely feel that there needs to be a proper conversation around...
but would you like to see them paid more and then talked about in a way that might make it easier to recruit people?
Absolutely, because the challenge at the moment, and again, speaking to a care home in my constituency just this weekend, and last weekend I spoke to a few, the added complexity of employers' national insurance increasing, minimum wage increasing. Then it may be that a care home is wanting to outsource some contractual work, but then the costs associated with that has gone up. But yet the costs associated with providing that care has been increased through no control associated with that care home, that nursing home provider. And then on top of that, you've seen today's announcement through the white paper, where the headline then is associated with no additional recruitment will be able to come from overseas to support this. So the twin-tracked process that I was talking about early on needs to happen right at the start. Our care system cannot wait 3 years for the Casey review to come out.
All right, but that's fair. But you said you would like to see care workers paid more. Well, that would cost taxpayers more, wouldn't it? So how would you pay for it?
We need to make sure that if we're wanting to upskill and recruit more people into our care sector domestically, we need to make sure it's an attractive, well-deserved...
How would you pay for it? How would you pay for that? We just heard from Nadra. Local authority spending has been slashed by Conservative governments previously, and I don't see Labour reinstating all of that money that's been cut. How would you pay for it?
Well, we certainly wouldn't be making the decisions that the Labour government are making at the moment in terms of how we're spending public money. I think there needs to be a proper conversation of how...
I don't really know what that means. Well, if it means you wouldn't increase national insurance, it means you wouldn't it means you wouldn't spend 22 billion on the NHS, which, as Nadra says, the NHS crisis is directly contributing to the social care crisis.
Would not have made...
It's clear what you wouldn't do, but what would you do?
OK, well, we would not have given the pay increases without any performance outcomes associated with them.
So you wouldn't pay care workers more?
We would. I think it's right that if you're having a conversation around increasing pay, that you link performance to it.
I don't think not paying care workers, not paying nurses more would help with any of the situation we're in.
The government.
It wouldn't help with domestic recruitment and bringing down migration levels if we're not paying nurses and we're not paying care workers better.
I'm not, but you need to have some sort of association with a level of performance expectation increasing on the back of it.
I think we're expecting a lot from care workers and nurses already.
Well, let me go back to Nadra. I mean, listening to that discussion, does that give you hope and reassurance?
No, not at all. I mean, I think, you know, we find that it's a political hot potato, and everybody says what they think they want to say to make it sound better. But the reality is on the ground, in the care setting, where we're looking after 30, 40, 50 people in a care setting, the impact on that business is you know, energy crisis, all of that. Nobody has helped us in any way, shape or form. Even through COVID, we were having huge challenges. We had some grant funding, but this has been going on and on and on. And actually, we do want to pay our workforce much more, and we should be commissioned properly so that we can meet that criteria. Right. And the Fair Pay Agreement is a really important piece of work, but it has to be funded. Right. If it's not funded, it will just fall by the wayside. All providers will close.
Dawn, what's your reaction around this whole discussion about how do you make working in the care sector more attractive? Pay would help. How is it then funded?
Well, I mean, that's the $64,000 question. One of my best friends used to work in the care sector in a care home, and honestly, Jo, she would be in tears every single day. The pressure on, as Nadja will understand, on people on the front line is impossible. And they really care, most of them really care about what they're doing. They care about elderly patients in particular, and they are treated appalling. There is no respect from either colour of government at the moment for that care sector. It is mainly low-paid women as well. And this is what my friend would say to me. She goes, we are spending billions of pounds. I know it's legal migration we're talking about. We're spending billions of pounds on illegal migrants. How about putting some of that money into the people that are really, really working hard, like Nadra and the people she works with on the front line?
Right. And in terms of trying to recruit a domestic workforce or more people from a domestic workforce, and we heard Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, also say this morning that some of the 9 million people who are currently economically inactive, to use the official term, will need to get back to work. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, a lot of those are men, of course, and this is where there's an interesting interaction between lots of different problems. There's the problem of the immigration system, which is a very difficult problem, the problem of the care system, which is such a difficult problem that every government appoints a commission, pretty much every government. So I think Cameron government, we had the Dilnot Commission. Usually someone from the House of Lords is asked to spend a couple of years working on it because it's incredibly hard. The politics of getting care right is so hard, especially if you're not willing to spend quite a bit of money on it. And then it also links to the conversation about boys and men in society, which I know you're going to get to, which is like right now, 1 in 10 nurses are male, 1 in 5 care workers are male. And so we do have in our domestic workforce quite a few people who, if we change the kind of gendered nature of those roles, could potentially flow into them. And right now we're trying to solve the problem of the care workforce with only half of the labour market, the female half. And so there's really something to be said here for saying, well, why don't we try the other half of the labour market in the UK? That, of course, will take time, whether it's men or women, which comes back to our earlier conversation about being careful about the phasing.
Yeah, and the thing is, it comes back to the money situation as well, Jo. I mean, you know, we heard Keir Starmer say, training British workers to do these jobs. Fantastic, great idea. Nobody's going to disagree with that, whether they're male or female. However, where does the money come from training them? How is that going to be funded?
Yeah, there is no cost-free option here. And unfortunately, one of the ways to solve the problem of the care workforce, and in other areas too, like construction and so on, has actually been through immigration. And we have to be honest about the economics of that. And so if you start closing down the inflow of workers to solve that economic problem, that doesn't take the problem away. It just makes it a different one. So you're going to have to pay these workers quite a bit more if you're going to solve it domestically. And that's going to take money. And so then you've got a different political problem, which is I've got to go out and raise taxes. So there's no easy solution to this. And so what governments will tend to do, and Keir Starmer has not done this time, is to set an arbitrary cap for net migration and kick social care into the long grass through a commission. Well, neither of those have worked for the last 30 years.
Right. I mean, Nadra, in terms of what Richard was saying about using the other half of the population more in the care sector, is that something you're actively pursuing or would like to actively pursue?
Absolutely. We will pursue any route to try and get a domestic workforce. I mean, the reality is that all the time we've got politicians talking about social care being low skilled when it is highly skilled, low paid. You know, why would somebody want to come into our sector when that is the narrative that they hear on a regular basis? You talk about the NHS in a very positive way, despite the fact that billions are being put into that to stabilise it. And social care, who's asking for not anywhere near that sort of money, just so that we can actually support our workforce and meet the cost of living impacts our workforce. Interest rates go up, energy costs go up, everything that impacts them. So that is why domestic workforce will go elsewhere, because they can earn a little bit more money.
Nadra Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us today as we discuss the announcements on immigration from the government. We've been talking mainly about legal migration, about net migration. Let's talk about what governments call irregular or illegal migration and those small boat crossings. This is the headline in the Daily Telegraph. Judges' powers to block deportations will be curbed. Sir Keir Starmer to close ECHR migrant loophole that let Palestinian family move to UK under scheme for Ukrainian refugees. Well, Keir Starmer was asked about the European Convention on Human Rights and whether he would disapply parts of it by a journalist from the Daily Express in the press conference afterwards. Let's take a listen.
Does going further mean disentangling ourselves from the ECHR and disapplying human rights laws in immigration cases?
No, I don't think that is necessary. I also remind myself that the international agreements we've signed have given us the basis for the deals that we've struck on illegal migration. You can't strike those deals with other countries to work more closely together on law enforcement, to smash the gangs, and to work on returns agreements, which is what we want to do, if in the next breath you're saying you don't believe in international law.
Well, BBC correspondent Simon Jones tweeted this while the Prime Minister was talking. As the PM was making his speech on legal migration, the issue of illegal migration was being illustrated at Dover. Several small boats crossed the Channel this morning. Around 12,000 people have made the journey this year, a rise of a quarter on the same period last year. The numbers are far smaller, Dawn, but for many people, do you think it is the most visible sign and therefore it is the issue that many voters focus on? Unless the government does succeed in sorting out this issue in the way they say they want to, people won't think it has been actually dealt with.
I think, as you say, Jo, it is a very, very visible sign of Labour actually not having control of their borders. And I think a lot of people hearing what Keir Starmer said today, taking back control of our borders, he said it 5 times in that speech. People are just going to go, well, hold on a minute, you can't control the illegal migrants coming over here in the boats. How do we expect you to take on the legal migration and the fact that those figures are so high?
Richard?
Yeah, it's about trust, and these are obviously visceral images. They do strike a chord, and they can be politicised in ways that can be unhelpful. But in the end, I do think it speaks to trust in the system. And I agree with Dawn that if people feel like we can't sensibly deal with those who are coming in illegally, on which there is no real political debate, then I think it will make people wonder whether the whole system as a whole is working. And they're not wrong to wonder that.
Right. Do we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, especially with this right to family life, if you're applying through that convention?
It absolutely needs to be an option. We, as a sovereign country, should have control of those decisions. And if it means that the ECHR is overruling that, or indeed provisions within the Human Rights Act, then we need to have it on the table that we can come out of both of those organisations. The reason I say that is we've learnt under the previous administration, we've seen the challenges. The problems are there for everyone to see. We see so many people in our hotels, in our communities, and the frustration is there. What is frustrating about the government's announcement today is it doesn't seem to be learning from the problems that the previous administration made. And those options have to be on the table, coming out of the ECHR and the challenges of the Human Rights Act.
Danny?
I disagree. I mean, I think these aren't someone else's human rights. They're my human rights, they're yours, they're your viewers' human rights. I think the only two countries to rip these human rights up are Belarus and Russia, and I certainly don't want to follow in their lead. I think looking at how human rights are applied, whether the balance is right, it's completely the right approach that the Prime Minister has. But to rip up our human rights is a terrible, terrible idea. And I don't think the Conservatives have learned any lessons from the last 14 years. I mean, what matters is practical action. We've been in government for 10 months. The laws on migration are just passing Parliament now, so it is too early to say their effect. But we've already agreed a deal with France, and they're now sending people back in the ocean.
One of the things
with Germany on a similar
one of the things
agreement
that we're advocating is that if you commit an offence here and you've come here illegally, you should be deported. Surely, Danny, that is something that your constituents be advocating for.
The deportation of foreign criminals is up 16%. 24,000 people have been returned in the first 10 months, and we are changing the law so people who convict offences while they're here, the Home Office knows about that, and they can be deported.
Do you not think we should go further on that?
Well, I'm going to stop you there because I want to talk about the Women and Equalities Committee, who have launched a new inquiry into misogyny, the manosphere and online content. Now, it was a subject that Laura Kunsberg, my colleague, asked the singer-songwriter on her programme yesterday, Youngblood. Let's have a listen.
I really want to embrace my masculinity, which is a crazy thing to say in 2025. You know what I mean? People are like, what? And what I meant by that is, like, there is a different type of masculinity. There is a beautiful, pure, loving, caring, but also, like, I like to box, I like to sing, I like to, but I also like to wear a kill or what I like. There's a new type of masculinity that can be out there and that can be shown.
Is there a new type of masculinity that can be embraced, Richard?
Well, I look great in a kilt.
Well, that's good to know. You've put that argument to question to bed.
Put that to bed. Yeah, I think this is a great conversation to be having. I think the important thing is to be having it in a way that's constructive, positive sum. You know, I love the descriptions of the fact that it's OK to have some masculinity as long as it's not in a way that's somehow anti-women. And I think the problem we've got into right now is any discussion of masculinity is very often with the prefix toxic masculinity. And we'll very often make the mistake of thinking not that men might have some problems, but that men are the problem. And you individualise it, you make it pathological, you make it toxic, you say kind of what's wrong with men. And that's my slight concern with this work from the House of Commons, from the committee. We'll see, but the danger is that it's going into it with the question of what's wrong with men. And really, that's, of course, we have to take responsibility. But at the same time, yeah, male employment's down, prison population up, male suicide is still the biggest killer of young men in the UK. There are also a lot of problems that we have to address for men. And so let's see if the House of Commons Education Committee resurrects its planned inquiry into boys in schools, for example. I would love to see that as well as the committee's work that you've just referred to.
I mean, do you think the subject is approached in a negative way, that the problem is with men?
Well, problems with men. How long have we got on the record?
We'll do another show.
Well, exactly. I'm joking. No, I think the problem with this whole debate is it is toxic because it's like the division in everything in society now. It's like, you know, men, as we were discussing before we came on, have huge problems. But what men are doing now is blaming women for their problems. And women are in return.
Some men.
Some. Present company excluded, obviously. Well. And women in return are being more of defensive, and we have the whole toxic masculinity issue. Now, this debate, when it's done like that, is doing neither sex any good whatsoever.
Absolutely. It becomes zero-sum. And I do think, I think, again, there's a blame on both sides here. I think that some of the more reactionary voices on the right are saying, yeah, we see that men are struggling, which they are, and it's the fault of all those feminists who've taken over everything and hate men. But on the left, quite often, you'll say, look, there aren't enough women doing well in the labour market. And you know what? It's because of toxic masculinity and mansplaining and the patriarchy. And so we're inviting men and women to blame each other for problems that are really about the labour market, our political system, our training system, and stuff that sounds a lot more boring, but is also true.
Robbie?
I think there's not enough focus actually on social mobility in the conversation as well. And when you're speaking about individuals that have come from sometimes very deprived backgrounds, not necessarily had the opportunities available for them, particularly young lads, that are, you know, again, in my constituency, and too much of the conversation focusing actually on protected characteristics, dare I say, rather than actually social mobility and trying to get to the crux of the issue to provide those feeling of aspiration, opportunities, proper role models being associated with those young lads as they go through the education system and
it's a good
younger life.
I agree with that, and the good example is that you'll see that the actually young women are now earning a little bit more than young men in the UK, and that's for one really good reason, which is that women's wages have gone up, and one really bad reason, which is that young men's wages have not. And so you can celebrate the first, but actually not neglect the second. And there are so many young men, especially as you say, working class young men in this country who are doing worse than their fathers were on many measures, and that's not good for anybody, including women and girls.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
No, I can. As a man who likes football and a face mask, I completely agree with young blood. I think
at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily at the same time. Not very practical.
What about kilts?
But I think no, definitely not with these needs. But no, I think definitely men should be able to talk about being men. I went on an amazing mental health walk in my constituency with a group of men who said it was the first time really they could talk about being a father with other fathers, talk about the challenges of work. And so I think it's completely right. The government's launching a men's health strategy, which I think is really important. Looking at mental health, suicide, as Richard's mentioned. I think ultimately, we need to talk about positive role models, about what it means to be a man in a positive way that isn't to the detriment of any other groups, but it's about building men up, allowing them to have good lives, be able to support a family, get decent jobs and skills. I don't think those are bad things to talk about and to seek to address.
What's the policy response, though, Richard? It's fine that we discuss these things, and you've talked about not wanting to take away from other groups. Women perhaps haven't been as successful for very long in terms of the statistics. They haven't sort of been in that position where they might be earning a bit more of them perhaps going to university, if you want to use that metric, whatever it is. So what would the policy response be? It wouldn't be taking away or doing anything that would somehow have quotas for men, for example.
No, I don't think that would survive the European Court of Human Rights, actually. Speaking of our earlier conversation, but no, I don't. This has to be not zero-sum. There has to be a way that we rise together around this. But to just take one area, we know that there's a problem, which is in the education system. We have a huge gap now in college enrolment, 10 points or more. We're seeing boys struggling in school, on average more than girls, and especially if they're working class boys. What do we do about that? Well, what we know is that having more male teachers would help. And we see a decline in the share of male teachers. 1 in 3 primary schools don't have a single male teacher in the UK now. And that's, again, related to some of these issues we've talked about around pay, more vocational training, etc. And so actually just sending boys and young men out into the world with more skills, which I agree would actually mean more social mobility, etc. But this isn't a policy response, it's more of a rhetorical response, which I think is good, which is that people like Wed Streeting and others are jumping past the idea that somehow to talk about and then start addressing the problems of boys and men signals that you're anti-women. And that is, everybody can agree with it. William Hague has written really well about this recently. This is not a partisan issue. Everybody can recognise a society where so many of our boys and men are struggling is not good for anybody, especially, of course, those boys and men, but for everyone else in their lives. So I'm thrilled that the current Labour government has actually announced a men's health strategy.
And you're launching your own initiative here.
Yes, so we're launching the Centre on Policy Research on Boys and Men, to look at these issues from a think tank perspective, entirely non-partisan. Let's start with the facts, and then we can talk about what to do about them, where we have some ideas too. But we're still in the stage, I think, now of increasing the permission space around this conversation. I'm delighted that everybody here thinks it's okay to talk about the problems of boys and men and say masculinity isn't bad. But we've still got a little bit more work to do, I think, to kind of just give ourselves permission to talk about this without fear that you're one of those misogynists that the committee is about to look at.
I mean, has misogyny got better or worse in your experience?
I think it's got worse.
Do
I
you?
really do. I mean, I worked on tabloid newspaper floors back in the 80s, and I can honestly say, Jo, that I think it is worse now. I think the advent of social media hasn't helped, but there was a report the other day on young children in school and the misogynistic language they use to girl pupils and female teachers, including a 10-year-old boy threatening to rape a 10-year-old girl. He probably didn't even know what the word meant, but where is he picking that language up from? That's why I think misogyny is worse now, because we're seeing younger and younger boys using language like that to women.
Right. I mean, Richard, briefly, very briefly, your response to that.
Yeah, what's happening is that a lot of boys and young men are reacting. And they're reacting against this perceived sense that they are somehow the problem, and then right now they can go online and find people and say, you're not the problem, it's those women over there. So I'm worried about that, but we also have to be very careful not to give the impression that we think that all these young men out there are just turning into misogynists, because that isn't true, and if we say that, we lose more of them.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much to all of my guests, and I will be back tomorrow with more at 12:15.